Hi, Richard here. I want to talk about fascism today. If you ask 100 people what fascism means, you'll probably get 100 different answers. But fascism is a scientific term that means only one thing. So we're going to be talking about that one thing, that one definition. But first, in order to understand fascism as well as anything else in politics, you really have to have a class perspective. You have to understand what class is. So I'm just going to go over this very briefly, but if you want a more fuller explanation, go to Red Shirt 6. That's about class society, right? So class society started 10,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution. And you basically have the rulers and the toilers. The toilers create the wealth, the rulers take the wealth and own the wealth. Today in our society, we have a capitalist class which owns the wealth. They're the millionaires and the billionaires. On the other opposite end are the working class. They're the producers. Also, they work for wages, and they're also known as proletariat. So you know that class does not mean income level. It's a relationship of a person's how a person relates to the means of production. So that's where, and middle classes, of course, you have small business people, you have managers, you have farmers, you have students, and you have professionals. These are the middle classes. There's no upper class, middle class, lower class. That's a lot of BS. Anyway, there are also declassed people. We'll find this out. We'll talk more about this when we talk about who fascism recruits. Declassed are chronic unemployed and criminal class. So now, in order to understand fascism, you really have to study history. You can't listen to somebody else and what they think it is. You really have to study history. And especially, I would study the Weimar Republic. That's what I did. When I came across Trotsky's The Fight Against Fascism in Germany, I finally got it. And it was so simple, it blew my mind. But of course, I had a class perspective at that time. Fascism is the last-ditch, desperate attempt by the capitalist class to stop a socialist revolution led by the working class. That is the definition. Fascism is a mass movement of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands who worship violence as spiritual cleansing. That's a very important part of fascism, the fascist movement. It's not a normal authoritarian situation. They don't like thinking, and they don't like discussion. They're sick of inactivity and inability to decide, and so they believe in just acting on their racial instincts, as they call it. They'd rather let their brilliant leader do the thinking for them. And all they need to do is act. In other words, commit violence against people who need to be subdued or killed. Okay, so this is how fascists think. And their main or enemy is organized labor. The working class is their enemy. And never forget that. In spite of what they say, they may call themselves socialists, right? It doesn't matter. They are there to stop organized labor and a socialist revolution. Fascism's anti-capitalist talk belies the fact that fascism seeks to protect capitalist property relations. That's right. Private ownership of wealth, the private accumulation of wealth. That's capitalist property relations. They will preserve that. They'll talk against capitalism, but they will preserve capitalism in the end. Now, the capitalists will use very reluctantly, they'll use fascists to subdue and divide the working class. So, these fascists are white men, and they're patriarchal. Women should stay in the kitchen and cook and have babies and stuff like that. They're racist because racism and patriarchy divide the working class. This is an old thing. It's been 10,000 years old. Divide and conquer. And that, of course, they go right into it. And, of course, Jew hating. we're going to see fascism bring that old thing out again too, because again, that divides the working class. Divide and conquer. It's very, very useful. Now they recruit from these classes, ruined middle classes. Now people that are ruined by the depression that we're in right now, for example. And also declassed people, like I said before, a criminal class, chronic unemployed. Of course, the chronic unemployed can go with the working class too. And the middle classes also can go with the working class. Just depends on if the working class can get together, can create solidarity. Now, is a politician authoritarian or fascist? Well, then you've got to look at that. You've got to look at these factors. There are a lot of authoritarian leaders and politicians around the world, but they're not fascists. There is no mass fascist movement right now anywhere in the whole world. First of all, you want to ask, does this leader have cadre? Cadre is very important. That means an army. It could be a small army, a big army. That's the mass movement. They like to be uniformed. It doesn't have to be, but they are ready to beat up all opposition or kill if necessary. They also talk white supremacy. Okay, they're not just racist. They talk white supremacy. Whites are superior to everybody else. And they talk about sexism, how women should stay hidden and support their men, and it's the men that do the fighting. Okay, they're also chummy with war profiteering capitalists. That's what we found with Mussolini and Hitler. Those movements, they were very chummy with the war profiteers, the armaments manufacturers and everybody that makes a living off of war, because the ultimate object of fascism is war. They move towards war. Violence is cleansing. Violence is spiritual. So kill the bad guys. That's war on other nations, right? That's the ultimate violence. And I want to draw your attention to something. The next World War, World War III, will be a catastrophe for us. I think nuclear winter will be a lot harder to survive, for example, than global warming. Global warming is a serious issue. Nuclear winter is the end. That's the ultimate consequence of a fascist takeover. It's something that we need to understand. That's why I'm doing this podcast. It is a symptom of a dying capitalism. Capitalism is, at this current juncture in history, dying. And without a revolution, what we're going to get is a fascist takeover and World War III. So it's something to be alarmed at. Roosevelt, for example, initiated social programs in the 30s, but then in 1937 they went back on all that and took a lot of it back. They pushed through austerity in 1937 because their profit margins weren't keeping up. And so the only answer for them was World War II. And that was the same with all of the capitalist nations in the world, the big capitalists. They went for World War II, and that actually gave capitalism 25 years of breathing space, which then started tanking again in 1971 when profit margin started going down. So we've been living in a Depression 2.0 since 1971, actually. So fascism, what stops fascism is proletarian solidarity. International proletarian solidarity stops fascism and ends capitalism and class society. That's called the socialist revolution. And it has to be international. And it has to be led by the working class, because the working class has power. The working class has hands on the means of production of wealth. You can find out more about the working class if you go to Red Shirt 5, the previous segment. Okay. So I would look at Weimar. If you're interested, look at Weimar. Get Trotsky's book. There's a pamphlet on it too, The Fight Against Fascism in Germany. The first election in 1932, there were two elections in 32. The first election, the Nazis got 37%. They were riding high. And then on the second election, they got 33%. They started getting beaten up by the working class organizations. And people started to lose faith in the Nazis. Thought, well, maybe these guys aren't the answer after all. Only 33%. The German people never gave them more than 33%. Remember that as workers for Nazis. That's not what happened. Okay. The two working class parties together at that second election garnered 39%. If they had joined together, they could have demanded a government, or they at least would have joined together and they would have overpowered the Nazis. But the German capitalists, the industrialists, the bankers, the war profiteers, they panicked because they saw a revolution coming. They thought maybe these two parties, these two working class parties and all these unions are going to unite and overpower us, and the Nazis are going down in popularity. Oh no, they hoped that the Nazis would rise. The Nazis, of course, refused to work with anybody. They weren't going to form any coalition at all. So they panicked. They said, dang, we got to appoint Hitler chancellor early in 1933 because we're facing a general strike here if we don't do something, because the situation was that bad in 1932 in Germany and all over the world, as a matter of fact. So, the SPD, the Socialist Party, and the KPD, they couldn't unite. The Social Democrats and the Stalinists from Moscow hated each other as much as they hated the Nazis. They were that stupid. Now, why the confusion? Well, fascism is used as a dirty name. You don't like somebody, you don't like his personality, call him a fascist. Sure, no, I don't agree with that. That is a crying wolf. And we need to know what fascism is, because when it raises its ugly head, we need to know that. We need to be aware of that. That's this poor educational system that we get in the United States and elsewhere, although in Europe they have lived under fascism, so they know the difference between a right-wing populist like Trump and an actual fascist. So Mussolini was quoted as saying, fascism is the conjunction of big business and government. Listen, if you want to know what fascism is, do not ask a fascist. They are stupid. They don't care about theory. They don't care about thinking. And neither did Mussolini. If it was that simple, then you would have to say that President Grant in the 1860s was a fascist, because he was totally tied in with the rail corporations, industrial corporations, and the bankers. He was in their hip pocket. And every president and every U.S. government after that, you'd have to call fascist. That's kind of stupid, isn't it? That doesn't make any sense and helps nothing, right? Because it wasn't fascist. Okay. All right. So if you vote the Democrats, which is the capitalist party, because of Trump, because they're calling Trump a fascist, like some of these liberal leaders are doing, this is really dumb, and it's not going to help anything. It's only going to keep the status quo, maintains the status quo by voting for capitalism. What we have to do is just liberal bullshit. Okay? Don't cry wolf. Fascism is an immediate danger. You will recognize it. I've told you how to recognize it. And so, what we have in these elections right now, all this, he's a fascist, no. It's two capitalist factions fighting for the lucrative government jobs in November. That's all that is. So that's fascism. Don't get fooled. Don't get buffaloed. Don't get BS'd. And I would recommend getting that book from Pathfinder Press, Read the Militant. And until next time, this red shirt saying, keep fighting.